the recording. Okay, so the subject tonight is a wonderful story from the Talmud called Kamtza and Bar Kamtza. And I certainly never heard this story until I started getting into Talmud. And I think, Alan, you said you came across it fairly recently in reading.
It's tied into the Tisha B'Av
Yes,
logic of what causes or what's
yes.
attributed to the destruction of Jerusalem. But anyway, Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove, the prominent conservative rabbi in New York, is part of his book. I happen to be in that
Oh,
chapter.
okay.
Yeah.
So have any of you heard this story before, Kamsa and Bar Kamsa? So the issue is to explain why the temple was destroyed. So I'm just curious, actually, um, we can talk historically about it, and then we'll read what the Talmud has to say about it. So I don't know how many of you are interested in sort of this area of history, but do any of you have any thoughts on why the temple was destroyed, either from a historical point of view or a theological point of view? Yeah, go ahead, Lois. Yeah.
I always heard that the Talmud said causeless hatred
Yes.
between us. And the reason that's been so interesting to me over the years working in the Jewish community is how close I think we are to that. Every now and then, it's not so crazy that we could do something because of our own internal stuff. And I feel it right now.
Yeah, and actually, I should also mention that there are two separate stories of why the first temple was destroyed and the second temple was destroyed. Ken and Patricia.
I always thought it was because the Jews revolted and the Romans crushed the revolt and destroyed the temple as a result of having crushed the revolt.
Okay, so we're getting into the historical part of it. Okay. And any other thoughts of people about why the temple was destroyed?
I,
Either first or second temple. Stephen, yeah.
an interesting one that I thought of myself, and this does not go along with anything. But this is more along of the what would be God's motives. Maybe it was specifically so that people would stop sacrificing animals there, or in general.
Yeah, so we actually talked about this in another session with the idea that the Torah is deliberately flawed by God. And that is one of the flaws is putting things in that don't make any sense, certainly to our ears. And animal sacrifice would be one of them. And so, we talked about this. But if God wrote in the Torah that instead of sacrificing animals, you just, get together in a synagogue and pray and do mitzvot, and I mean that would be the equivalent of asking people to put on tinfoil hats and spin around in circles. So basically the idea, and I don't want to belabor this one, was that the Torah speaks to Jews in the time in which it was written, and it is left to the rabbis to bring it up to date. Lois, you reminded me of something I actually read in a news article today concerning the Reconstructionist movement. And the largest Reconstructionist synagogue in the Reconstructionist movement is in Pacific Palisades.
Correct.
And they are in the process of voting to remove themselves from the Reconstructionist movement. Both, so that would be the Reconstructionist equivalent of the URJ. And the reason is that the Reconstructionist movement has been welcoming what I would describe as anti-Zionist rabbinical students and presumably ordaining them. And there have been a couple whoops, I lost you. There've been a couple of these people that rabbinic students that quit because of basically the Reconstructionist college is open to different Jewish views on Zionism. And that is upsetting a lot of congregations that I would say, are more traditional. And again, I hasten to emphasize the difference between supporting Zionism, which is supporting the right of Israel to exist, and supporting the current government and the current strategy in Gaza and Lebanon and Iran and so on. But because and I think this is the kind of thing you're talking about, Lois, because now we are starting to see more and more Jews that are, I would say, super critical of Zionism, down to the point of openly supporting Palestinian causes, including statements like "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," which basically is a code word for destroying Israel. So the question is Judaism, the question for the Reconstructionist movement is, Reconstructionist movement typically is very reconstructing. They're always changing their models and they're very open and so on. But they are showing themselves, well, at least for many congregations, and in this one, this is the largest Reconstructionist congregation in the movement. It's about 900 families in Pacific Palisades, and they have problems of their own. The building survived, but it was damaged, and a lot of the congregants and even several of the rabbis lost homes. But we are certainly seeing these days, I think this is what you're referring to, Lois, some hatred between groups of Jews. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, let me just say, because this is in, my LA community, a couple of months ago, there was a story before Kehilat Israel got involved about what was happening at the Reconstructionist College. It's not about disagreements or opinions on the Israeli government. It was about anti-Zionism, and they were letting in students, according to other students, who were anti-Zionist, didn't think Israel had a right to exist, not supporting Palestinian.
Right.
Okay, and so some of these rabbinical students broke off and created their own study groups because they felt and the president at the time, who now has decided she's stepping down, God only knows what that means, had said, no, we've made it very clear, we're a Zionist movement, and we can't, help what people individually think. So I think this is really important and I will just say this about Kehilat Israel. You're right, Rabbi Lacker, everything you said. 4 rabbis there lost their homes, a lot of congregants. But it's interesting to know that the only reason they're Reconstructionist is that their founding rabbi graduated from Reconstructionist College, just like Rabbi Schulweis. I mean, it wasn't they don't have some kind of ideological thing.
So that's a whole other interesting subject about why people join congregations and why congregations.
Right. And that's the only one in Pacific Palisades. So, but I think.
Who is their founding rabbi? It's not Judith Halevi.
I can't, it's a while ago.
Okay.
I mean, Steve Rubin was their last senior.
Okay.
And these people are strong Zionists. That doesn't mean they agree with everything Israel. But I would say, to the point you are making, following up on what I said, I hate to say it, but I think this is the end of Reconstructionism. And
okay, I don't want to go there deeply, but I do want to clarify one thing you said, because I didn't understand it. When you said groups of rabbis wanted to form little study groups, was that the anti-Zionist group or a pro-Zionist group?
These are the ones who were complaining about the college admitting anti-Zionists.
Okay, so it was okay. I just wanted to understand that, Alan, and then we should get to our text.
I wanted to make the distinction about institutional disagreement in the actual issue that relates to the story that you're going to read that had to do with cause the temple to being destroyed. It was the way of people behaving among each other and on good faith. The movements, and the one I know most is Reform, but it would be applied to Reconstructionists. This become philosophical things. They're not, I don't know if they fall into the same point where people are, disagreeing between themselves in a way that, supports the definition of what caused the temple to be destroyed. I'm raising.
Okay, so we'll read the story, but it is definitely what is called sinat chinom, which
Yeah.
is gratuitous hatred. So I am again playing a little bit with my screens here, and I'm going to try and start
Translate
sharing.
baseless hatred.
Are you recording?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Okay. So can people see the screen?
Mhm.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So this is actually, it's Kamtza and Bar Kamtza, a 3-act story by David Schwartz. Actually, I don't know much about David Schwartz. His contribution is to organize it this way and raise some questions. This is actually a wonderful service of Safaria, where you can find some really great material on Safaria. Okay, so this is going to be one of these ones where I think I am going to read so I can comment at will. The Talmudic story associated with Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is the 9th day of the Hebrew month of Av, and it's the day in which the first temple was destroyed, the day in which the second temple was destroyed. It's also understood historically to be the day in which the Jews were expelled from Spain, and a lot of other things. So but it is a day of mourning. It's coming up in I think the first Saturday night, Sunday in August. And it's called Kamtza and Bar Kamtza on one foot. On one foot means it's a short discussion and explanation. It is from the Talmud tractate Gittin. And again, if you want to look I actually have prepared ways we can go back and forth to Safaria. Okay, and Gittin is kind of interesting in that a get is a divorce. So Gittin is the plural of get, actually in Aramaic. So the story is in the section dealing with divorces, and just kind of interesting. Okay, the Gemara explains Jerusalem was destroyed on account of Kamtza and Bar Kamtza. This is as there was a certain man whose friend was named Kamtza, and whose enemy was named Bar Kamtza. By the way, Bar Kamtza means son of Kamtza, and I've never seen a suggestion that these two were father and son. It's just like, a guy named Hur and a guy named Ben-Hur. So he once, the guy doing a party, made a large feast and said to his servant, "Go bring me my friend Kamtza." The servant went and mistakenly brought him his enemy Bar Kamtza. The man who was hosting the feast came and found Bar Kamtza sitting at the feast, and he was not happy. The host said to Bar Kamtza, "That man is the enemy of that man." Namely, here they're translating literally. Basically, he's saying to Bar Kamtza, "You are my enemy. What then do you want here? What are you doing here? Arise and leave." Okay. So Bar Kamtza says to him, "Since I've already come, let me stay, and I will give you money for whatever I eat and drink." So offer number one, I'll pay for whatever my cost is, so you don't have to worry about paying for me. There's actually a couple of videos which I watched quickly. They weren't great. In one of them it says, "I'll pay the cover charge," and they sort of modernize it and update it. Okay, so he said, "I'll pay for what I eat and drink. Just do not embarrass me by sending me out." And actually, one of the sub-themes of this discussion is how serious Judaism takes the issue of embarrassing someone else. So the host said to him, "No, you must leave." Bar Kamtza said to him, "I will give you money for half of the feast. Just do not send me away." So not only is he willing to pay for himself, but he'll pay for half of the whole feast. The host said to him, "No, you must leave." Bar Kamtza said, "I will pay for the whole thing. I'll give you money for the entire feast. Just let me stay." The host said to him, "No, you must leave." Finally, the host took Bar Kamtza by his hand, stood him up, and took him out. So, okay, so now we have a little bit of commentary from the person who organized this. This is from the Babylonian Talmud, Masechet. It's a word for tractate, Gittin, which is about divorce. The Mishnah, remember the Talmud basically is a discussion of the Mishnah. So the Mishnah explores the question of buying a field from a couple who is endorsing and how this might be affected by the circumstances during the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans. So this is a classic way of the way the Talmud works. The Mishnah and the Talmud are discussing divorces. And apparently they get, I haven't even looked at this, but apparently they get to the question of buying a field from a couple who is divorcing and what happens, I guess, if this is during the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans. And so while they're discussing this, let's see what else he says. The Gemara then poses the question of why the Romans were destroying Jerusalem in the first place, and that brings the story. Classic way the Talmud works. They're discussing something. Well, what would we do if this was during the time when the temple, when Jerusalem was being destroyed by the Romans? And oh, by the way, since we're talking about Jerusalem being destroyed by the Romans, why did that happen anyway? It's one of the reasons why, you need guides to the Talmud, and the footnotes are really helpful, and the explanations are helpful. So actually, we'll start by discussing some of these questions. He actually raises the same questions for every little section. So who is at fault here? Let me just read the questions, then we can discuss a little bit. Who is at fault here? At what points could the story have been changed? Did anybody make a good decision? What lessons about leadership can be learned from this? Should the other guests have done anything? If so, what might they have done? Alan.
Up to where you talked about what I'll call the tangent about the field and the divorce, the wording was exactly the way Rabbi Kozroff is in his book, except that he goes, you may get to it, but he goes a little further on how the humiliated person's reacting with this revenge.
Oh yeah, we're going to get there. This is just Act 1.
Right. So, okay. No, but that's what caught me off guard was what appears to be a tangent that you're reinforcing. It's a typical Talmudic tactic.
Yes. Yes. So and the other example, which I always use, is the whole discussion. Now I'm getting a bell ringing. Let me see.
We're not getting that. We don't.
Okay. Yeah. Jim is coming in. In the discussion of Hanukkah, the whole discussion of Hanukkah is in Tractate Shabbat, and the rabbis in Tractate Shabbat are talking about what kind of wicks you can use for oil lamps, for Shabbat oil lamps. And then somebody says, well, what about Hanukkah lamps? And the rabbis say, well, what the heck is Hanukkah? And that's where they tell the whole Hanukkah story. It's a digression in the discussion of what wicks are kosher in Shabbat oil lamps. Stephen.
Okay, so in terms of who's at fault, well, and made a mistake, made a good decision, whatever. The servant is clearly in error.
Yes.
Screwed up, but that seems to be an honest mistake, not made with any malice.
Right.
The Bar Kamtza seems to be out of line, but once it's made clear to him that kicking the guy out will be extremely embarrassing to the guy for whatever reason that I don't understand. But since that's clearly the case, he at that point should, either with or without accepting the money, let the guy stay, or at least have the guy leave discreetly, say, we'll make up some story that you're not feeling well, whatever. I'll have a messenger come in with a bogus urgent message for you to have to feel something somewhere else so you can leave without being embarrassed.
Right. And Bar Kamtza, by the way, just to get the people straight, Bar Kamtza is the guest who was mistakenly invited. We don't know the name of the host of the party.
Right. Or of the servant.
We don't know the name of the servant either. And
we haven't really gotten to this part yet, but knowing what's coming up later in the story, Bar Kamtza is arguably wrong to be making these offers of, I'm going to give you all this money if you let me stay, because those offers get turned down probably contributes to his anger level. It leads to what happens later in the story. And if he hadn't offered all this money and had the money be rejected, then he wouldn't be as angry.
Oh, that's interesting. So I would say what's going on here is Bar Kamtza doesn't want to be humiliated. He basically enters. The host says, "You're my enemy. Get the hell out of here." And we don't know if this discussion is going on in hushed tones or what, but clearly he doesn't want to be humiliated by being kicked out of the party.
Yeah, which is
So,
the problem with question 5, because we don't know if the guests knew what was going on or not.
we're going to find out.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, but certainly at this stage we don't know. So Alan, yeah.
So Bar Kamsa is not innocent in the following way. It's not in the questions. It could be. There is that he knows that he was invited by this guy that they don't like each other. Okay, and
Yeah.
he goes anyway, and he doesn't go in advance privately to see did I, are you trying to be nice to me? Are we making up? Or, he doesn't question it. He just shows up, and so he has
Yeah. So you can
ability.
argue
Yeah,
that if he were more sensitive, he would have discreetly inquired, "Are you really inviting me?" Or maybe he just, anyway, we don't know. We don't know. Uh,
You're suggesting he knows that the servant has made a mistake and that he
yeah. So, I mean, I think we really have no idea whether that's the case, but it's a possibility. Certainly, in terms of points where the story could be changed, Bar Kamsa could have discreetly left, said, I got a telephone call. Probably that wouldn't have worked, but he could have discreetly left the party. Certainly the host could have allowed him to stay. And I think they said that it was a big party, but I don't know. Let's see.
yeah, no, that's what Cosgrove says. It's a big party.
Yeah, a
So
large feast. Okay. So presumably it's not just, a few people. It's a large feast. So the host could have allowed him to stay and been gracious about it. There are stories in my own family of, I'll say relatives who I certainly am not going to name, who can be a little clueless and were not invited to, I'll just say, some significant events, but just assumed that they should be invited and showed up anyway. And of course, the host welcomed them as though they had been invited. So yeah, so there were a lot of places where things could have been changed. And then the question is, should the other guests have done anything? Actually, in our Monday night classes, we're talking about the affirmative mitzvah to rebuke. If you see someone doing something wrong, you have an affirmative obligation to rebuke. So one possibility is someone could have intervened and either spoken to either party and tried to make peace. Okay. Act 2. So he was thrown out, I think, at the end of Act 1, right? Yeah, took him out. The host physically took him out. Okay, after having been cast out from the feast, Bar Kamsa said to himself, since the sages were sitting there and did not protest the actions of the host, although they saw how he humiliated me, learn from that they were content with what he did. And the Hebrew is Rabbanan. So the reference here, sages, is a reasonable translation, but they're talking about the rabbis. So he's saying, so the rabbis agreed with his humiliation. I will therefore go and inform against them to the king. He went and said to the emperor, the Jews have rebelled against you. The emperor said to him, who says that this is the case? Bar Kamsa said to him, go and test them. Send them an offering to be brought in honor of the government and see whether they will sacrifice it. So again, the gist of the story is the emperor of Rome, or it could have been the local ruler. I didn't really focus on what Hebrew they had for the emperor. It's a little hard to find here. Actually, Anyway, I'm not going to worry about it unless there's really an issue. But one of the things the emperor could do just as a peace offering is to provide an animal for an animal sacrifice in the temple. And so Bar Kamtza is saying they're not going to sacrifice it because they're planning a revolt against you. The emperor went and sent with him a choice 3-year-old calf. While Bar Kamtza was coming with the calf, he made a blemish on the calf's upper lip, and some say he made a blemish on its eyelids. A place where, according to us, i.e. halacha, is a blemish, but according to them, Gentile rules for their offerings is not a blemish. So again, just a word of explanation. There are laws about what kind of animals you can sacrifice in the temple, and it has to be unblemished. But then the question is, what constitutes a blemish? And so the understanding here is a cut on the lip or on an eyelid would render an animal unfit for sacrifice in the temple, according to Jewish law. But according to Romans, who were presumably also sacrificing animals in their holy places, a small blemish like that would not be a problem. And in fact, we were even discussing this on Monday, I think, Alan. We were talking about, what's allowed at the Western Wall. Are women allowed to wear tefillin? Are women allowed to read from Torah? So we would say, as Reformed Jews, they are allowed. Orthodox Jews would say they aren't allowed. So it's this reminds me of the same idea. Okay, therefore, when Bar Kamtza brought the animal to the temple, the priests would not sacrifice it on the altar since it was blemished. But they could also not explain this satisfactorily to the Gentile authorities who did not consider it to be blemished. Okay, same sort of questions. The new ones that are different are added. What does the text say about our obligation to speak up about injustices in our times now? Do we need to witness a situation to be a bystander? According to Rabbi Ed Feinstein, this shows that the fate of a community lies in the texture of the fabric of its relationships. How is that relevant today? And yeah, I know, Lois, you know Ed Feinstein, I think.
Very well.
Yep, he's the rabbi, or maybe he's retired now. I'm not even sure.
No, partly. He's part-time.
Okay, at Valley Beth Shalom.
And he's still a rabbi there.
Okay, so what could have been done differently to stop this disaster from happening? I mean, it's certainly Bar Kamtza could have controlled himself a little more and said, although I was humiliated, I don't want to make literally an international incident. Alan.
So this is a partially fictional play that's been described that adds material to the actual Talmudic conversation.
The Talmudic stuff is literally what's in the Talmud. There's nothing added there.
Okay, because
these questions are added.
No, okay, so then, so some of what you read is not the part that Cosgrove includes, but let me make my comment this way: is that it's kind of like saying that the Talmud words a dispute between Hillel and Shammai to teach us a lesson, and now we're taking this apart. Maybe they should have had an argument differently. So I think this was deliberately created in the Talmud before you start adding these questions, because we were supposed to have taught that how people's behavior causes the destruction of the temple, and that's the story. And if you start to project that, well, what could they have done different? You take away from the lesson. The lesson is, and if they had behaved better, we would have to have a different answer for why the temple was destroyed.
Okay, so yes. So let's just stop for a second. The temple was destroyed. Of that, there is no question. And now the rabbis are stuck with an issue which says if the temple was destroyed, it must have been the will of God. So therefore, what would cause God to allow this to happen?
Yeah, yeah. And so
Right.
I like that part. And this particular dialogue is sort of
And then
taking
what do we learn from it?
lesson. Yeah, they're taking away from the lesson. Yeah.
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 So I'll just offer the fact that the rabbi, seeing how humiliated Bar Kamtza was, or anyone sitting at the party, seeing how humiliated Bar Kamtza was, could have gone over to him and, try to be a peacemaker, a counselor, a comforter, um, to try and make peace between the parties. Presumably, they also could have, as the argument broke out, pulled away the host of the party to say, look, humiliating this guy, I understand that you're enemy, but humiliating this guy is really not allowed under Jewish law. You're not allowed to publicly humiliate someone. Let's just figure out another way to address this. So I mean, I think ultimately that's what the Talmud is saying, is those are the things that we as Jews need to do. And ultimately, if we don't do those things, drastic things can happen to the Jewish people, which is, I think, exactly what Lois was worrying about as we began this discussion. Okay, Act 3. The blemish notwithstanding, the sages thought to sacrifice an animal as an offering due to the imperative to maintain peace with the government. That's actually an important Jewish value. I think it talks about it in the Pirkei Avot. We have an obligation to follow the laws of the government in which we live, and I can't remember the exact language in the Pirkei Avot, but basically it says a government is necessary because it maintains society. Remember, the rabbis are living in a world, and the Jews have lived in a world for the last 2,000 years where Jews don't have civil authority, so we're dependent upon another government to keep the peace. It's only since 1948 that Jews have had civil control over our own government. Alan, I don't know if your hand is still up from.
No, it's up
Yeah,
because
go ahead.
this teaching, which I've known for a long time, it leads to this question. This teaching about obeying civil government does it apply to the state of Israel? It only applies to the diaspora.
That's an interesting question. I presume it. I hold on. You
Yeah,
asked me a question. Let me guess at the answer. I don't know,
okay.
but I presume it applies in the state of Israel.
Well,
That
I'm suggesting it might not because the way in which the Haredim behave relative to the government and not claiming they don't have the authority because the Messiah hasn't come, that makes me suggest that they aren't going to the Haredim I'm projecting is not trying to be contradictory to the Talmud. So possibly this is a teaching that applies out when there isn't a state of Israel.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's an interesting question. I don't know what the Haredi would say, but I would still say the Haredi would say you still have to stop at stop signs. You still have to
Yeah,
obey the laws of
you have to go in the army if you're drafted.
yeah, unless you're exempted. And that's the issue of who should be
Right.
exempted. But it's a very good question, and I don't know the
But
answer.
some rules are designed to apply to in this land of Israel, and some apply to not everything, but some are distinguished in that way, right?
Okay.
Okay.
So they're asking, so the sages, the rabbis, Sabur Rabbanan, are wondering whether we should sacrifice the animal anyway to maintain peace, mishum shalom malchut, peace with the malchut, the kingdom. Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkolas said to them, if the priests do that, people will say that blemished animals may be sacrificed as offerings on the altar. So he's worried about how will it look if we allow people to sacrifice these animals. Next thing you know, they'll be eating ham and cheese sandwiches. The sages say, if we do not sacrifice it, then we must prevent Bar Kamtza from reporting this to the emperor. So that's another way of doing it. Presumably, they knew or suspected he was going to go to the emperor. The sages thought to kill him so that he would not go and speak against them. Rabbi Zachariah said, if you kill him, people will say that one who makes a blemish on a sacrificial animal is to be killed. As a result, they did nothing. Bar Kamtza's slander was accepted by the authorities, and consequently, the war between the Jews and the Romans began. Rabbi Yochanan says, the excessive humility, and I've seen other translations of this word, the excessive humility of Rabbi Zachariah destroyed our temple, burned our sanctuary, and exiled us from the land. I would say it's not humility, and again, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what the Aramaic is there, but clearly the fact that the rabbi wouldn't interfere with this caused the sanctuary to be destroyed. So to conclude our story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa and the destruction of Jerusalem, the Gemara cites a Baraita. It is taught, Rabbi Elazar says, come and see how great the power of shame, how great is the power of shame. For the Holy One, blessed be God, assisted Bar Kamsa, who had been humiliated, and due to this humiliation and shame, God destroyed God's temple and burned God's sanctuary. So this is even going further, that says, basically, God took Bar Kamsa's side because he had been humiliated, even though it resulted in the complete destruction of the temple.
God thought humiliation was so horrible. Why didn't God just arrange things for him not to be humiliated? Why didn't God not have the servant make the mistake or whatever? It seems to be a...
Okay, yeah, see, and you can ask the question, why didn't God just change Pharaoh's mind? Rather than need all these plagues.
But we say, because God wanted to be the hero who saved everybody and got all the credit for it.
But I would also say, and this is something that the rabbis were very uncomfortable with miracles, with God directly intervening in human affairs. So when we're getting into these times, there's probably a zillion counterexamples because the Talmud goes all over the place. But by and large, God doesn't intervene to keep us from making stupid mistakes. I can testify to that personally. God does not intervene to keep us from making stupid mistakes. So in addition to the questions that they asked before, and I would say this is one of the points, is there such a thing as being overly ethical? And the other thing which is kind of interesting is we never hear from Kamsa, who was the friend, since he never got the invitation, yet his name is on the story. And Rabbi Zachariah seems to be a perfectionist. What would he say are the benefits of this approach? What would Rabbi Yochanan say are the dangers of perfectionism? Another way of looking at Rabbi Zachariah is that he's religiously cautious. When might that be a valuable trait? When might it be important to override that tendency? Let me just pause here and before I go to the last part. And just ask for any comments so far. Go ahead.
Clem, I see here with this whole story is presumably at some point along the way, they have to figure out that there's going to be death, that if the Romans decide to destroy the temple or whatever, that people are going to get killed in the process. Now, the original thing, backing up a little bit about not sacrificing animals that are blemished and whatever, is not one of the the three or so mitzvot that even if it's a matter of life and death, you follow the rule. They should, once they realize there's no way out of this where everybody lives, say we're allowed to break the rule by either by sacrificing the animal or one of the other ways in order to save a life.
Right. The issue then, what Rabbi Zachariah would probably say is, I don't know that this is going to cause death. It's just we don't know what the Romans are going to do. So or we're not sure. This is the question of, is he religiously cautious?
Well,
I would say if he knew with certainty that,
so they
sorry?
must. They're considering killing Bar Kamtza, so clearly they must consider it a potential matter of life.
Yeah, but he speaks against it. One of the I don't know who says that.
He doesn't speak against because it's murder. He speaks against
the rabbis say they sought to kill him, and Zachariah says if you kill him, shouldn't kill him. People will say that someone makes a blemish on a sacrificial offer should be killed. So I don't think he's disputing the point about human life being more valuable. Alan.
So you made the statement that by the time of the rabbis are uncomfortable about miracles, and so
I would say they're uncomfortable with the idea of God directly intervening in human activities.
Exactly. So then that leads me to think, so to achieve God's purpose of the lesson is to encourage or incite people's behavior to complete the story, the lesson. The lesson is to behave in a certain way among people, not just because God, made you not do or not do something, but I will illustrate it by bad behavior and good behavior, and you will then appreciate, the right way to behave.
Yeah. One of the lessons that we learn from this story is that needless hatred among peoples can have enormous consequences. And of course, living now 2,000 years later, we have all learned this, and we can't think of an example in our society of gratuitous hatred between groups. Ken.
Um, I think Rabbi Zechariah, I don't think he was cautious at all. I think he was quite incautious because here you have a conflict between two possible actions, and he just gives sort of like a knee-jerk response to it without thinking about the possible repercussions, thinking it all the way through. So I think. I don't agree with his line of reasoning, I don't think.
Yeah, and there's another story in the Talmud, and I think the issue is, are you allowed to blow the shofar on Shabbat in Rosh Hashanah? And if I remember the story correctly, the rabbis are discussing this, and it's Rosh Hashanah and it's Shabbat, and they send the guy in the community, and he blows the shofar, and so then the next day they start to analyze it, and should we continue this custom? And I think it's Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, well, we've already done it, so there's nothing to discuss.
I was
So
I was I was going to say, and because thinking sort of along another line opposed to Rabbi Zachariah, we have rules regarding you shouldn't kill someone, but if someone is going to kill someone else and you know about it, then it's okay to kill them. Or if they're if they're threatening your life, it's okay to kill
right.
them. So there are exceptions to these rules. Plus, the rabbis have more control of some kind or another over their own people and can explain to them about the blemish on the sacrifice, whereas they have no control over the government and how they might respond.
I mean, I guess in theory, they could have sent a delegation to the government assuring them of their loyalty and said this is an internal measure, and we don't mean any harm by it. That's a possibility. Alan.
So back in the original story, we're supposed to learn that the misbehavior between two people, the host and the guest, the uninvited guest, that behavior led to the consequences, the way they engaged the government. So the government and the third party and all the things, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that it's the behavior between the people that is the
Yes.
lesson. But what I wanted to ask about free will. So when we're talking about God, or at least our understanding under rabbinic Judaism, to avoid miracles directly caused by God, can I try to fold in the part that I often try to do to explain things, which has to do with free will?
And what's your
Well, I mean, in other words, the hostess and the uninvited guests, they behaved in a way that they used their own free will. They knew certain behaviors. They knew there was some humiliation going on. They both, let's say, assumed they knew the principles of the values, but it was there in our free will which can contribute to the destruction of the.
so bottom line, if there's no free will, you can't sin, right? I can't make a puppet sin. The person who controls the puppet sins. So in order to have sin and punishment and redemption and repentance, you have to have free will. So both the host and Bar Kamtza have free will, and they use it. So I would say the point of the story is be careful. I mean, these commandments aren't laws of physics. The physics does not have the option of stopping gravity. But any law in the Talmud or laws of Judaism, anyone is free to not obey it, but we're going to bear consequences. And I would say one of the lessons is that those consequences can be widespread. So we're going to look at one story, one very quick section. It says, elsewhere in the Talmud, the rabbis say the second temple was destroyed because of sinat chinam, baseless hatred. Do you see that at work in this story? If so, where? Either way, what would it look like if baseless love were employed in the story? So here's the story. In Yoma is the Aramaic word for Hayom, the day. In the Talmud, when they're talking about the day, you might ask which day they're talking about Yom Kippur. So, however, considering that the people during the Second Temple period were engaged in Torah study, observance of mitzvot, and acts of kindness, and that they did not perform the sinful acts that were performed in the First Temple. By the way, and I haven't done the research on this, the understanding is the First Temple was destroyed because people were sinning against God. So here they're saying, they're violating Jewish law. So here they're saying the people were engaged in doing all these mitzvot. So why was the Second Temple destroyed? It was destroyed due to the fact that there was wanton hatred during that period. It comes to teach you that the sin of wanted hatred is equivalent to the three severe transgressions: idol worship, forbidden sexual relations, and bloodshed. So aravot shpichut, I guess that's damim. Oh, spilling blood. Yeah. Oh, here it is. Avodah zarah. That's idol worship. Gilui arayot. So that's revealing nakedness, which is forbidden sexual um, uh, activities, and spilling blood, which are the three things in Jewish law where if you're in a situation where you're forced to do any one of those things, you surrender your own life before being willing to do those things. So I am going to stop the sharing and be back so I can see you well. So anyway, so that's the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. I just think, the lesson, it's astounding to me that this lesson is in the Talmud. And in some ways, it's astounding to me that we don't hear more about it, particularly in arguments between people who are very observant and people who are less observant. So, for example, at the Western Wall, the women of the wall, the ultra Orthodox or Orthodox are trying to prevent women from reading Torah. They're trying to prevent women from wearing talit and tefillin and so on. So they're being super loyal to the details of ritual law, to the point of humiliating and causing hatred and anger. And it seems to me that they are not learning from this lesson of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. And
Next time the hotel rabbi calls me, I'll point that out to him, okay?
Sorry?
I'm making a point that we in the Reform movement try to make those points in writing to the Kotel rabbi and to into the officials on the same subject, and they've concluded, like earlier conversations, Rabbi, that you have to decide how to interpret. When they say that we're desecrating their holy place, that put it at a higher level than worrying about whether you're humiliating the women.
Right. So what's the way to resolve it?
Well, the way it's partially been solved and it got put on pause is to engage the civil officials well, it was a three-way negotiation that kind of fell apart, but point is diplomacy and cooperation, I guess, is the answer.
Yeah, and you may know that there is a place that's again the Western Wall. It's actually further south than where the Kotel is. I can't remember what they call it, but it's sort of a
South step. They call it the South Steps.
But it's
no. Okay. There is something called the Southern Steps. Hold on.
Sorry.
Southern Steps are actually steps going up to the Temple Mount, which are not on the Western Wall, they're on the Southern Wall. It's one of my favorite places in Jerusalem, and I love that place. The area, it's sort of the liberal worship area. So just south of the Western Wall, if you go south maybe 100, 200 meters, there's an area, it's adjacent to the Western Wall. There's a platform there. Men and women pray together. You can do pretty much whatever you want. Well, I wouldn't say whatever you want. Now it's not governed by the Orthodox authorities. And there's been, there were plans to enlarge it. Now I haven't been there actually in several years. I don't know if you were there on this trip, Alan.
I was there, but you're talking about Robinson. It's actually still on
Robinson's Arch, near Robinson's Arch. Yes.
I mean, Dung Gate is the entrance from the south, but the thing that appeals to the non-Orthodox is that you can say you're at the Western Wall, even though you're south of the main Kotel.
Yes, you are definitely at the Western Wall. You're not at the traditional site of the Kotel. And then the question is, why is the traditional site of the Kotel so precious? And that is, it has remained exposed for all of these years and was a place where Jews would go to worship. And again, during many years when Jews weren't allowed there, they were allowed only on Tisha B'Av. Actually, when Jordan ruled over the Kotel during the period from 48 to 67, Jews were still allowed there on Tisha B'Av. And then there's all kinds of interesting legends about the Western Wall, that angels hang out there, or that the poor people paid for that construction. But anyway, a negotiated settlement on this issue was taking place
8 years ago,
where there were plans to really enlarge that area and make it as interesting and attractive and appealing as the Kotel is now. But basically, through various political, ups and downs and shenanigans, that has been pretty much been interrupted. So it's actually quite a small area. It is a platform. It's not so easy to go up and actually touch the wall.
You can't touch the wall physically.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you can actually if you enter as a tourist.
The other side, for lack of calling who they are, is that the agreed upon deal in 2017 or 2016 was a compromise that the ultra-Orthodox changed their mind after they signed up. And then they made that just as bad a place for us to pray there as the main Kotel. I mean, it's just the women praying there And men and women together is even worse, at least under the women of the wall, only women are in the women area. But
Yeah,
the
I'm not aware of. I'm truly not aware, so I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm not aware of Orthodox hatred of that area, of that.
how about on the first of Tammuz 2 years ago when I was there? It was after I was there. There was a bar mitzvah being held, and a bunch of Orthodox people came in and they created a mechitza to separate the men from being near praying together on that platform in the
Okay.
so
Yeah.
they're and so the police stand there and they heckle us when we're there, but
Hmm.
we do pray men and women together. But it doesn't serve the purpose in the eyes of the women of the wall to not be allowed to pray in the women's area. So
Right.
it's
Right.
it's so that
And what I would also say is, my recollection of the politics is that when the government needed the support of the liberal parties, they they created this area and they embraced the area. And now, you have a government in Israel that's strictly the right-wing parties, and they don't need the liberal parties, so they basically in have abandoned that.
some of that is true. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
some.
Okay, Joanne.
So, no, I was just thinking about the question, can it ever be too ethical? Um, and I just think that you have to have structure. You have to have the halakha. And of course, there's room for flexibility, but as the years went on, things change and people change. But I still think it's say, a good underlying foundation and nice to have that in place. Um, yeah.
So actually, I disagree with the word ethical in that context because I think of ethical as dealing with how you treat other people. I would include animals and the environment. And there
Okay.
I would say Reform Judaism, and I would say that those laws should remain in place and
Okay.
and
I
religiously
agree.
observed. The issue of, do you keep strictly kosher? The men cover their head at all times? Do you pray 3 times a day? Do you have a mezuzah on every doorpost in your house? Do you never wear a garment of wool and linen? Do you heckle men and women if they try and pray together? I would not consider those ethical laws. I would consider them ritual laws.
The laws of how to
Okay.
treat animals include, though, the requirement to sacrifice them.
Yes, no, it's not needlessly inflicting pain on animals,
Yeah.
which is why the rabbis added rules about how you slaughter animals, whether you're slaughtering them for sacrifice or slaughtering them just for dinner, that you do whatever you can do to avoid needlessly causing pain. Um, it's also, yeah, there's a law, Jewish law, you're required to feed your animals before you eat yourself. Um, so anyway, so yeah, it is a compromise, but treatment of animals ethically is part of Jewish tradition.
So I agree with you on what I'm not, I didn't mean it in a way where I'm not agreeing.
No, I understand.
Okay.
Yeah, the issue is where you draw the line and
Right.
how you get that compromise.
That's it.
And can people of different religious passions, I'll put it that way, respect each other? Or
It's a
do
problem.
they humiliate each other?
Yeah.
And the lesson in this Kamsa and Bar Kamsa is humiliation can lead to disastrous consequences.
Which is a
Yeah.
shame. It's enough we have to deal with what goes on outside of the religion as far as respect, let
Yeah.
alone let it.
Golda Meir once famously said to the Arab nations, "If you really want to destroy Israel, leave us alone, and we'll kill each other." Uh,
Yeah.
And that's
um,
the point of this story, what you just said.
yes, yes, that is literally the point of the story.
The
And you look at history, and again, I'm not a great student of history, but there are examples where individuals cause nightmares. The assassination of the Archduke, leading to World War I. I mean, there are individual actions that have tremendous consequences. And even I remembered, I'm just sort of remembering things at random. The I think it was the first Intifada, horrible uprising of Palestinians against Israelis, was because a couple of ultra-Orthodox Jews went up on the Temple Mount and tried to place a cornerstone for the third temple. And then there have been other intifadas where members of the government have gone up to the Temple Mount and tried to lead Jews in prayer or insist that the Jews have the right to pray up there. And we're seeing it now these days with, how do you enforce immigration laws? Do you enforce it in a way that is sensitive? Let me try and choose my words very carefully. Do you try and enforce it in a way that is sensitive to not humiliating people and treating them as though they are created in the image of God? Or do you just, set aside that issue and treat people more like animals? I mean, you can argue we need to enforce these laws. That's a separate question. But also how you do it is important, and how you do it can lead to horrible consequences. I mean, the beating of Rodney King, the death of the guy in Minneapolis,
Floyd,
George
yeah, George
Floyd.
Yeah. So individual actions can have enormous, widespread consequences. And so, I mean, I find it just sort of amazing that idea that people were overzealous in enforcing religious law, that the rabbis are saying that's what led to the destruction of the temple. We might argue that those are terrible things, but the rabbis of the Talmud are saying that. So I just find that's why I'm so fascinated by that story. Okay, I do want to mention, and I will send it out in the email tonight. Sonia and I are traveling next week, so we will not have a class next Wednesday. We do have a class on Monday, and Alan, you're going to be presenting some material about your trip to Israel, and we're going to be continuing the discussion that we have been having about, I guess, the obligation to rebuke. Okay, any other thoughts?
Now, this is not the correct interpretation, but does anyone see the way to interpret this as being, if the child that finds the afikomen on Passover wants to receive a dog as the reward and is dyslexic, then
don't go there, Stephen.
Where do you think I'm going with this?
Okay, thank you.
I'm not going where you think I am. This is too
bizarre.
Oh,
it's not dog and God?
No.
Oh, okay, sorry.
No, this is different.
I apologize.
You're on the right track, but it's not that one. It's a different one.
Okay.
Much more bizarre. Because it has to do specifically with Passover. And it has to do with this story. The problem is that if you give someone a dog during Passover, they might name it Matzah. And then when they tell the dog to bark, if they're dyslexic, when they try to say Bar Kamtza, it might come out as Bar Kamtza.
Ah, good.
I'm sorry, I said it wrong. They try to say Bar Kamtza.
So I will tell you that Sonia and I have a cat, and the name of our cat is Matzah.
Wow.
But you wouldn't say bark to it, but you wouldn't tell a cat to bark, so that doesn't.
No, and there are times that we search for matzah.
So my point is, so somebody says bark. If the kids try to say bark matzah, and he actually says bar kamtza. The point that I'm making is, if you get creative enough, you can find any lesson you want in any story, and I think that's what is kind of going on here. That the story doesn't really justify the conclusions that are being drawn. People are just figuring out a way to match up the stories with the lessons that they want to teach without regard for whether that's really what the stories prove or not.
So what I would say, taking your comments seriously, is the Talmud is a mixture of halachic material and agadic material, of legal material and stories. And it's actually, well, the Bible is like that too. We have stories in the Bible, and then we also have legal material in the Bible. And what I have been led to understand in my reading is the Bible and the Talmud are unique in that regard. There are ancient law codes, but they don't have stories in them. and the stories underline the teaching. I mean, like Aesop's fables. So I do think the story leads you to that conclusion. Of course, you can torture the story and read anything you want into it. I mean, it's like the old joke about the guy showing Rorschach images and the patient seeing nude women in all of them, and the psychologist saying, you really have an obsession with nude women. And the guy says to the psychologist, "You're the one with all the pictures of the nude women." So you can read things into it, but I think that's clearly what's going on in this story and the intent of the story. Alan.
I really wanted to ask Lois if we could talk about, not now necessarily unless we stay on, about the Reconstructionist movement, because I'm curious and you seem to know a lot more than I know. If
Right.
we
I just wanted, before we go there or not go there, I just wanted to say to Stephen that Rabbi Feinstein, who we talked about a minute ago, at Tashlich performs bark mitzvahs for the dogs. Everybody, you're invited at one of the Tashlichs for Valley Shalom to bring your animals, and he does bark mitzvah.
that got cited in the criticism of the liberal world Zionist slates.
Yes.
That
Yes, reform have been criticized for doing
reform
that.
was specifically singled out, although in your example, it's not the reform movement, and it wasn't treated as, they treated it as if the
Right.
non-Orthodox were doing it seriously.
Right.
What, the animal? What are you talking about?
Bark mitzvah, that was
Bark
one.
mitzvah, it's not an original idea. I mean, people have been talking about that for years and
No,
years.
but to get people to vote in a certain way in the world Zionists, they were making it sound like the non-Orthodox, using the reform specifically, have real ceremonies.
Yes.
Anyway,
Yeah, it was a way of the Orthodox parties critiquing the liberal parties.
exactly.
Yeah, and there's a couple of jokes on that line, and at least I'm going to stop recording. Maybe I should stop recording before I tell the jokes. Is somebody asked, is there a blessing for animals? And Rabbi thinks about it a while, and he says, "Motzi lechem min haaretz." Okay, blessing for eating.
That's the blessing for bread, not the blessing for eating
Yeah,
meat.
but you say that before you have a meal, as long as you have bread with it.
Sure.
And then I wrote a song, which will surprise none of you, because my synagogue was having a day where we were going to bless animals, and I'm pretty sure it was to the tune of "How much is that doggy in the window?" How do you? I can't even remember any of the lines, but yeah, that's another whole discussion. Well, you can have a discussion with Alan, Lois, about the Reconstructionist movement. The Reconstructionist movement is really interesting because they continually reconstruct themselves. And so a lot of the innovations in the reform movement we stole from the Reconstructionist movement, including
conservative too.
the imahot and so on, and because they are small and flexible, and they have the biggest prayer book of any movement because they give you a million options to do at any time. I will leave you to discuss that offline, and yeah, I probably don't know enough.
Lois, I sent you my phone number if you can get it from the chat.
Yeah, and there are a number of rabbis that I'm aware of that were ordained in movements other than the congregations that they served.
Absolutely.
In our area, the rabbi for Etz Chaim, Shimon Pascal, rabbi for a conservative movement, was ordained in at HUC.
It's not current, but Rabbi Gary Johnson, and he doesn't go by that now, but he was Reform and he ran a conservative synagogue, right?
Yes, he had a conservative synagogue.
And
I have a very dear friend who's also graduate of HUC and a member of CCAR, and he led a conservative movement for most of his career, conservative congregation.
I think you're all making my point. I don't think the movements mean what they did before.
Yeah, and that's, that is a whole other question, which is, I would say, it'd be interesting to know. I think most people join a synagogue because they have friends there, or they have it was just happenstance. Sonia and I, my late wife Carol and I joined Temple of Dad Elohim because it was in the neighborhood.
So,
And
Rabbi,
the synagogue that I grew up in was conservative, and I'm pretty sure the synagogue where my kids were named in Maryland and Connecticut was conservative also. But when we moved to Southern California, we just happened to join a Reform synagogue.
so
So
that reminds me, I sat next to Rabbi Johnson at a Federation dinner 100 years ago when I lived in that area, and I said to him, "Oh, it's so nice to sit next to a conservative rabbi because I don't know much about conservative Judaism and I know I'm involved in it. So why do people join your temple, in 10 miles away from the Dada Elohim?" And this his decision was very short. He said, because when you move into a neighborhood, you find out the other families and who's going to carpool to Hebrew school.
yes,
Make your decision based on
yeah,
that.
yes,
No
yeah,
theology.
yeah. It's typically not
discussion.
deep theology.
No.
Okay, actually, I've got to go because I've got a wedding couple to meet with in a few minutes.
Alan, why do you
And
Mazel tov.
have tape with
thank you.
number stuff on them on your shirt?
Sorry?
What?
Why
That's the
do
number of days that the hostages have been in since October 7th, 2023.
Yeah, but you have two pieces of tape, 653 and 656. Probably forgot to take one off, right?
Okay.
Okay. Yeah,
I-
I was wondering about that too.
Okay.
Okay. So,
Michael, can you get off and just leave
no, I
us
can't.
on?
I can't because I'm meeting with another group. So I would say you
Oh,
can call
okay.
Alan.
I gave you my number, Lois. Do you have it?
I took it down. Thank
Okay,
you.
so when you
Okay.
can. Thank you.
Okay. Normally I could, but now I can't.
I
Okay.
understand.
Okay. Take care.
All right, good night.
Good night.